J'ouvre maintenant la séance.
I'll call the meeting to order. Welcome to meeting 78 of the Standing Committee of our committee, pursuant to Standing Order 108.3G. The committee will be looking at reports 5 to 9, 2023 of the Auditor General of Canada, referred to our committee today, October 19.
Them for being here, all from the Office of the Auditor General. Of course, we have Karen Hogan, Auditor General, Kerry Agnew, Principal, Makirit Art Mutlu, Principal, Jean Goulet, Principal, and Carol McCullough, Principal. It's great to see you all here today. Ms. Hogan, you have the floor for an opening statement. I understand it's going to run about 10-12 minutes. Over to you, please.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I wish to acknowledge that the lands on which we are gathered are part of the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. I'm pleased to be here today to discuss my reports that were just tabled in the House of Commons. We also included copies of special examinations of the Royal Canadian Mint, the Canadian Museum of History, and the Laurentian Pilotage Authority. These three reports were made public by the Crown Corporations earlier this year. I'm accompanied today by the principals who are responsible for the 5 performance audits. 2 points that stood out for me from all of these performance audits. The first is data. Weak or underused data often affects departments and agencies' ability to make well-informed decisions, monitor and report on results, and to assess the effectiveness of their decisions. Ultimately, these blind spots, identified in all of our reports, reduce the public service's ability to deliver programs and services that meet people's needs. Deuxièmement, je tiens à souligner l'importance.
My second point is timeliness and the impacts of failing to take prompt action. This theme runs through all the reports that I have presented today, whether the limited progress on antimicrobial resistance, which the World Health Organization called a silent pandemic last year, or the aging of IT systems, a problem that the government has known about for some 24 years. Progress that is measured in years, if not decades, is simply not acceptable when people risk not receiving benefits that they rely on, or when people do not have access to medicines that they need. I will turn first to our audit of antimicrobial resistance, an area that my office last examined in 2015. When it comes to public health, the COVID-19 pandemic showed that the cost of not being prepared is measured in lives lost. For this reason, antimicrobial resistance is concerning. The rate of resistance to first-line antibiotics in Canada was estimated at 26% in 2018, and it is likely to reach 40% by 2050. We found that overall, the federal government has not done enough to address this problem.
Canada released a pan-Canadian action plan on antimicrobial resistance in June 2023. I am concerned that it lacks critical elements like concrete deliverables, timelines, ways to measure progress, and clear roles and responsibilities for each level of government. Without these elements, it is unlikely that this plan will result in any progress. We found that the Public Health Agency and Health Canada have been slow to implement regulatory and other changes, such as economic incentives, that could improve Canadians' access to antibiotics of last resort. Only 2 of the 13 new antibiotics used to fight drug-resistant infections are available in Canada, yet all 13 are available in the United States. To successfully fight antimicrobial resistance, Canada needs a full picture of antimicrobial use and resistance across the country, and a solid plan so that the right medicines are available and used in the right way to protect the health of Canadians. Let's look next at two audits that are closely related. The first examined the government's overall approach to modernizing its information technology systems, while the second focused on a specific program to modernize how more than 10 million Canadians receive old age security, Canada Pension Plan, and employment insurance benefits. In the first audit, we found that about two-thirds of the approximately 7,500 software applications used in the government were in poor conditions, including 562 that are essential to the health, safety, security, and economic well-being of Canadians. We found that a number of factors contributed to delays and cost increases. They include a lack of centralized leadership and oversight, a shortage of skilled people to carry out the work, and an inflexible funding approach. Every day that these systems are not modernized increases the risks that they may fail and that Canadians may lose access to essential services. Les constatations du second audit.
The second audit, focusing on the Benefits Delivery Modernization Program, echoed these findings. Progress on modernizing the system that deliver benefits to Canadians has encountered delays, cost increases, and staffing challenges. The program is halfway through its 13-year timeline, and all benefits are still running on systems that are 20 to 60 years old. The second audit also illustrates how the government's funding approach is poorly suited to large IT projects. When the Benefits Delivery Modernization Program was launched in 2017, Employment and Social Development Canada estimated that it would cost $1.75 billion. That number has since been revised twice to reach $2.5 billion in April 2022 and is likely to change again in the face of further delays and challenges. That represents a 43% increase of the 2017 number, and no benefits have been migrated to the new platform at this point.
The department adjusted its approach to deal with the delays and other challenges in the Benefit Delivery Modernization Program. For example, it moved old age security, the oldest of the three systems and the one at greatest risk of failing, ahead of employment insurance in the migration schedule. While Employment and Social Development Canada's decision to focus on migrating the system rightly prioritizes the continuity of benefits, I am concerned that if challenges and delays continue, decisions could be made to remove aspects of transformation or take shortcuts to maintain the timelines or budgets, as happened in the Phoenix Pay system. This would put the Benefits Delivery Modernization Program at risk of resulting in a final product that fails to meet the needs of diverse and vulnerable client groups, including seniors, people in remote locations, Indigenous people, and refugees. Our fourth audit looked at the processing of immigration applications for permanent residents. We found delays, backlogs, and inefficiencies that affect the lives of people seeking to permanently make Canada their home, with the greatest impact on those applying to refugee programs. While Immigration, Refugee, and Citizenship Canada improved the time it took to process applications and reduced backlogs overall in 2022, it did not meet its service standards for prompt processing in any of the 8 programs we examined. People applying to refugee programs waited the longest, on average, close to 3 years. At the end of 2022, 99,000 refugees were still waiting for a decision on their application, and in the current processing environment, many will be waiting years. Although the government sets the target for how many permanent residents are admitted to Canada in a given year, we found that most delays and backlogs were caused by the department's own processes. For example, the department did not always process applications in the order they were received, causing older applications to get further backlogged, or routed applications to offices without considering their processing capacity. De plus, le ministère n'avait pas évalué.
Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada also did not assess whether its automated eligibility assessment tool reduced overall processing times for all applicants as intended, nor did it identify and resolve any unintended differential outcomes. Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada needs to analyze its backlog to understand the root causes for differential outcomes. It also has to ensure that the tools it implements are not contributing to these differences, and it must match workloads to available resources in its offices to improve processing times. Our last audit looked at actions taken by 6 federal organizations to foster an inclusive organizational culture and correct conditions of disadvantage in employment experienced by racialized employees. We noted that the 6 organizations had all established action plans in terms of equity, diversity, and inclusion, and took some actions, but none measured comprehensively reported progress against outcomes. We also found that organizations were not always using performance agreements for executives, managers, and supervisors to create accountability for fostering inclusion and for change. To the racialized employees who volunteered to be interviewed for this audit, these and other gaps were viewed as a lack of true commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion.
Organizations we audited focused on the goal of assembling a workforce representative of Canadian society. That is only the first step. It is not enough to achieve the change needed to create a truly inclusive workplace. For that change to happen, departments need to actively engage with their racialized employees, to meaningfully use the data they have to inform their decisions, and to hold their leadership accountable for delivering change. These issues are not new. If COVID-19 taught us anything, it is that being prepared and acting early costs less and results in better outcomes. I said it in March of 2021, and I will repeat it today. The government should not need a crisis to understand the importance of prompt action. Mr. Chair, that concludes my opening remarks. We'd be pleased to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So there's a few pressure points that we're facing this morning. One, of course, is Ms. Hogan and her team's time. The other, of course, is we will have bells at some point, and I've spoken to representatives from the various parties, and I think there's agreement to go approximately 15 minutes into the bells, with maybe a minute or two added on if someone is in the middle of a questioning, but not to go much, well, not to go any beyond that. So, with your agreement, I'm going to begin this meeting. Ms. Hogan, would you be able to stay a little bit beyond 11 if we're on a roll here? Yeah, okay, good. We won't push it beyond that. And I think bells will end it. So, as well, just to remind members, there'll be the predictable party order, but I'm going to have questions of 3 minutes each to hear from as many members as we possibly can in the time we have. So without further ado, I turn to Mr. Kimmick. You have the floor for 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Auditor General, for coming. So my first question is regarding report number 9 on IRCC. You've done a performance audit here of the 8 different permanent resident programs. On page 10, it says that since 2019, the service standards have not been reviewed, despite there being an increase in application. You found that none of the programs have been reviewed or updated. And then you also say further down that the 2 refugee programs, they have no set service standards, but those are required by the Treasury Board. So is the department in violation of Treasury Board directives?
Well, when a department provides a service, it is required by a Treasury Board policy to give an indication to Canadians how long they can expect, so what an expected service standard is. So it is an essential requirement, and we made some recommendations to the department about that. I think the most important thing that we did find, however, is that the existing service standards are not reliable. The department has not met them for many years, and our recommendations centered around being more transparent with applicants to ensure that they understand how long the wait will actually be. The wait is long, and refugees, who are arguably some of the most vulnerable, are waiting the longest, almost 3 years. So while they have no service standard, they should at least understand how long they might wait.
So is the department in violation of the Treasury Board directive to set a service standard? It says it's required by the directive. In the government's response, it says yes, but when you talk to the people in the department, they had no plan to set a standard. So are they in violation of the Treasury Board directives?
It is a requirement of the directive, and so yes, they should be making it clear and transparent to applicants how long they might wait for the processing of their applications.
So they're in violation. You also mentioned, Auditor General, about the processing times. So in all of our MP offices, we get probably hundreds of people every single year. Some of us probably get closer to thousands of people who come in and they said that they are beyond the service standard, and they show us what the application portal says. 400 days. I had a constituent from Tanzania, 1,013 days was what was showing in her portal. But according to this, I thought that was the average processing time expected, right? There's they take all the applications. This is the capacity. They think they're going to be able to do that. Your report says, though, on page 11, that they only take the previous 6 months of applications processed, and that's what they post. I feel misled, and I feel that the government, the department, is lying to my constituents when it says this is the expected processing time, because that's not what it says. It tells them you should expect your application to be processed in this timeline. But that's not what they're doing. They're only taking what they've processed in the previous 6 months. But they could have 50,000 applications that they have to process.
Mr. Kimmin, I'm going to just pause you there. If you'd like to just provide a brief response, please, Auditor.
So the department is providing the accurate information of what it took for the last 6 months, but it misses the fact that there is an inventory of applications that have been sitting there for much longer. So it gives a sense of what the workload and the capacity driven in the last 6 months, but again, doesn't give an applicant a transparent understanding of how long they might wait, which is exactly why we recommended that to the departments, is to be transparent with how long it's going to take. It will take time, but people should know how long.
Thank you very much. Ms. Shanahan, you have the floor for 3 minutes approximately.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Auditor General Hogan, and your team for the work that you have done. I know under challenging circumstances very often. I'm struck by two of the comments in your remarks. The concluding one, basically, the government should not need a crisis to understand the importance of prompt action, and I would summarize that in penny wise, pound foolish, as an expression that we do need to spend, invest and spend the funds necessary to bolster systems. Because earlier on you said that you are concerned that if challenges and delays continue in the modernization and transformation of the IT systems, decisions could be made to remove aspects of transformation or take shortcuts to maintain the timelines or budget. These decisions have not been made at this time, but they could be made in the future. So can you please talk to us about, first of all, address the difference between modernization and transformation of information technology systems, and then, with reference to Report 7, what investments in total have you seen being done where they're helpful? Where are the gaps? Where do you see that improvement needs to be made?
So one of my guiding sort of themes through some of these reports is taking a long time to accomplish things. And I said that in 2021 when we were releasing reports around the response to the pandemic. And at that time, we found that the government had not acted on things that it knew following H1N1 and SARS. And when we turn now to looking at, and I'll mention two quick reports and then get to the IT one, I would mention antimicrobial resistance commitments that the government made back in 2015, and we're seeing limited progress. But more perplexing would be knowing 24 years ago that aging IT systems is a problem, and still today not having a strategy on how to modernize the government's systems is concerning. So you asked me to explain the difference between modernization and transformation, and they're very closely linked. When we talk about modernization, the government defines it as moving to a better platform, a more stable platform, one with newer technology. So, for example, using the cloud. So that would be taking old systems, some of the systems that we looked at are 20 to 60 years old, and moving them to more modern applications. Then transforming really is about the user experience. So it's ensuring that there is greater access, more people eligible for benefits can access them, but that also making it more user-friendly so that when you try to apply for employment insurance or old age security or Canada Pension Plan, it's easier to do. So those two are essential. Why we're concerned about losing sight on that transformation, the user-friendly, is that was some of the cutbacks that we saw during other IT programs in the public service, and we wanted to just caution that when you lack investment over decades in IT systems, it's going to take some time and money to modernize them. So don't forget that transforming them into better service delivery for millions of Canadians is important.
Et voilà, merci beaucoup. Madame Claude Desgagnés, vous avez la parole pour 3 minutes.
3 minutes, Madame Gagné. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the Auditor General and her office for all the work that they have done. The reports are very interesting and informative about what's going on in the government at this time. I'm going to begin with report number 6, antimicrobial resistance. Do you have an idea of how much was invested by the government in this fight to combat antimicrobial resistance? I don't have that by heart. We will find it. But what we did note when we look at the amounts of money spent to date was that there was no dedicated funding to improving information with respect to antimicrobial resistance. Departments ran with their existing budgets, 2021-22, where it was anchored in that budget. But there was a lack of progress with respect to monies invested in progress. Yes, but in view of the fact that health is provincial in nature, provincial jurisdiction, what could be done to improve public health, the Public Health Agency of Canada, according to you? Well, normally, of course, it is provincial in nature, but there are about $35 million were spent between 2021 and 2023 with respect to antimicrobial resistance. There is research that is underway, and there was a plan that was put in place and advanced. There are concerns, though, about the plan. It has to be very essential, but the plan is lacking concrete objectives, and it has to detail the roles of the various levels of government. Were the provinces consulted in drafting this plan? Yes, of course, they were. They signed the agreement. But there is concrete action, real tangible results and action that is lacking. I can tell you, with respect to the money that was spent to date, there has been an improvement in the oversight, but there are gaps that remain. With respect to the agreements with the provinces, is information circulating freely and well between the federal government and the provinces, knowing, of course, that health is in the provincial bailiwick? Well, the commitment is a commitment made by the federal government that was drawn up in 2015. Following 2015, of course, there was a pause with respect to the pandemic, but we know the way in which health is overseen here in Canada. It's an agreement that between the various levels of government, between the federal government, the provinces, and the territories, and to improve action in Canada. Canada has 2 of 13 last resort microbial resistant drugs, whereas other countries have far more, 13 and more. That has to change. Thank you very much.
Mr. Desjardins, did you?
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, we can hear you, and you have the floor.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Ms. Hogan, for being present and for tabling these very important reports. You know, in some ways, to some comments that were made earlier already by some of my colleagues, they spoke about Report 9 IRCC. And this is something that I think, as most members of Parliament would be aware of, has been something that has been just bombarding our offices. We know from just the pure volume of requests from our constituents that there's something going wrong. And I think your report number 9 is a testament, a true testament to the fact that we've been experiencing this, but even worse, that we have real people, a live time, even as we speak, who are having applications waiting right now, many of them refugees. You spoke in your report how these are taking upwards of 30 months, even longer than that, some 3 years, and just the sense of inadequacy of the existing system as it exists, pertaining to what they qualify as the time of processing and what they actually experience. Would you agree that it kind of gives folks, in particular, most people, some of the world's most vulnerable, a false sense of hope when they see a time of processing that is completely unrealistic by their experience?
I think it's important to note that the department does process hundreds of thousands of permanent resident applications in a given year and have been meeting increasing immigration targets. But I agree with you that the service standards are not realistic service standards, which is why we recommended to the department to be more transparent about exactly the amount of time that it takes to process an application. There are many aspects that are outside the control of the department. About getting access to documents from certain countries might be difficult, but there are most of the delays that we saw were by the processes well within the control of the government, and I would sort of describe it as poor management of applications, poor inventory management of files that contributes a lot to some of the wait time, and that's well within the department's ability to fix. So being transparent and addressing those issues would help.
Mm-hmm. You know, my own experience from my office and working on behalf of constituents on this work, we often found, for example, more recent applications sometimes being processed faster that are of similar nature to some that were filed years ago. And to me, it seems like unfairness that exists in that system. And do you know, or can you contribute as to what system in particular failed, as to why that's a result?
Mm-hmm. I can tell you that in our audit, we found very similar things, that there were, that at times the processing of newer applications occurred before older applications. I do acknowledge that some applications might take time and that you can't necessarily always treat them in the order that they come in. But what was concerning for us was that the department wasn't doing that analysis along the lines of race or country of origin or country of residence. And we felt that it was important for them to analyze if there were differential outcomes and try to address what they might be. One of the causes we found was really where files are routed for processing, and that some offices are receiving workloads that don't match their employee complement.
Thank you very much. Turning now to Ms. Gray. Ms. Gray, you have the floor for 3 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the Auditor General and her team for being here. My first question is on Report 7, the Modernization Information Technology Systems Report. And you've stated that 2/3 of the software applications used by government were in poor health, including 562 that are essential to health, safety, security, or economic well-being of Canadians. Are you able to table for this committee what those applications are, what those 562 software applications were that you referred to?
I'm going to look to see if the database is publicly available. I don't know. It is not. So I would encourage the member to perhaps reach out to the department, Treasury Board, who really does gather all that information. There are 7,500 applications in that system. As you rightfully said, 562 were deemed critical. I would also point out that some of that information is old and outdated, and that was some of our recommendations, is that we encourage Treasury Board to get more timely and accurate information to be able to prioritize IT modernization.
Great, thank you very much. My next couple questions are with report number 8. So this is the Benefits Delivery Modernization Program, and the report says that the initial cost estimates for this IT project in 2017 were approximately $1.75 billion. As of April 2022, the cost was $2.5 billion, an increase of 43%, and then there was a Price Waterhouse report done in November of 2022, which estimates the final cost could be up to $3.4 billion, up to a 94% cumulative increase from the initial estimate. And so my first question is, do you have a list of consultants who have worked on this project, what their scope was, and what the breakdown of costs were for each of them?
So unfortunately, we didn't look at the contracting angle. We could provide you some information about some of the contractors that we know are in there. It might not be exhaustive. So I would encourage the member to reach out to the department. They have that information and can absolutely give it to you. What we looked at when we looked at the cost increases, we tried to understand why. And it was at the beginning because of sort of underestimating what some of the costs might be. But as time goes on, rising cost of labor, inflation, all those things will contribute to this continuing to grow. And that's why action needs to be taken to modernize this quickly and not continue to watch the price tag go up.
Great, thank you. So if you could table for this committee whatever information you do have. And then my second question is, the report refers to staffing. And so do you have any numbers on how many government staff have worked on this project, if it's changed year over year since 2017, and if there's any targets or projections, just the staff numbers? Thank you.
Again, this is all excellent questions that the department should be answering. They have all of that information. We didn't look at staffing and complement. We were looking at the progress made and whether or not the government was learning from lessons learned from other significant IT projects. So we can provide some information to the chair, but the best source of information would be the department.
Thank you. And of course, we'll have those officials, and I'm afraid that is the time. I'm turning now to Ms. Bradford. You have the floor for 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the Auditor General and their staff for being here this morning. I want to turn to report number 9, IRCC, and processing the application for permanent residence. So you state that you found in 2022 immigration had improved its processing times for most of the permanent resident programs you examined. Economic class applicants experienced the greatest improvement among all 3 immigration classes, and family class applicants also experienced improved processing time, with the newer applications making up the majority of the applications process. Can you tell us why that particular area seemed to have the most improvement and what contributed to that?
I believe it was because it was set as a priority in order to address that class of applications, and hence resources were focused on that. We see that often when the government sets immigration levels. They are divided by the different types of classes, whether they be humanitarian, economic, or family reunification. But at times, priorities come up. So, for example, in the past, we would have seen that when Syrian refugees were being accepted into into the country. There was a priority, so resources get rerouted, and processes get applications get processed quicker. It just means that there's a domino effect for those sitting in the inventory, and that's why it's really important for the department to understand the capacity of their offices and to be able to route applications in a better way, because right now it is definitely resulting in differential outcomes either across programs or across country of citizenship.
Okay, and also I noticed that processing times, and this is about for the private sponsorship refugee programs, they're shorter for applicants residing in Canada. How much shorter generally are they? And then what challenges are there specifically to the applicants that are not residing in Canada?
I'm going to see if Carol might have some more details on exactly how much shorter they are. I guess what I can explain to you from our understanding of the process is that one of the elements is interviewing applicants, which is easier to do when they're in Canada than in a country where there may be security concerns. Access to medical information and key documents might just be facilitated when someone is already in Canada versus overseas or in another country. I'm going to see if Carol now has found the differences, but.
We could absolutely provide you with the processing times. It was a matter of a few months. The reason being that the processing times were shorter for residents in Canada is because of the travel restrictions with the pandemic. The government prioritized processing the applications for individuals who were in Canada because they could be finalized, and they had to put on hold the applications that were overseas because those people, because of travel restrictions, couldn't travel. So we did find that there was priority given to in Canada, definitely, and that their processing times were shorter than those overseas.
Thank you very much. That is the time, I'm afraid. So, Auditor, we're going to keep you here for another 12 minutes, a little past 11. Turning now, c'est Madame Sécla Desgagnés. Vous avez la parole pour 3 minutes environ, s'il vous plaît.
Madame Desgagnés, you have the floor. I'd like to go, thank you, back to report number 8, modernization of the IT systems. When you look at everything that was invested by the government, in particular since 2017, 2018, in terms of expenditures, all of that was intended to modernize IT systems, inter alia, with companies like Fujitsu, IBM, and others, outside entities. Does it take 8 years to assess the strategies? I'm not sure. And when you assess the results in terms of modernization, I think it's just catastrophic. Your report points that out very clearly. The government isn't even able to meet its goals with respect to the modernization of the IT systems. So what would you advise in terms of the means that were put in place versus the results that were achieved? I have to say that I'm perplexed. Over 24 years now, the government still hasn't come up with a strategy to guide the modernization. Modernization is very slow. I would say that there has been investment made by individual departments, but hesitatingly. So we have noted that the lack of funding that is truly dedicated to the improvement of their capacities, IT capacities, really it does not appear. If I take a look at the modernization system for the delivery of benefits, you have to be able to look at the foundations. There's a possibility of using the cloud more, where you could have a benefit system on a stable platform. Yes, there have been some concrete achievements, but the government really doesn't know doesn't hold the exclusive rights to those achievements in terms of benefits. Well, should there not be another system there? Well, I'm telling you that from every day that passes, there's greater risk. So you're saying that next week the system could collapse, and that would mean that people, even the most vulnerable people, would not be able to access their benefits. It is up to the government to ensure the system is stable and that benefits continue to be developed. But the systems are old, 25 to 60 years old. Look, you can drive an old car. It costs you an awful lot in terms of maintenance, but it's not always reliable. Thank you.
Please, for 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I would like to follow up on two reports this time, in particular as it pertains to racism. I'll start with Report 5 that speaks directly to racism in the workplace. Several workplaces you audited, in particular 6 organizations that were under review: the Canada Border Service Agency, the Correctional Service Canada, the Department of Justice, the Public Prosecution Service, and the Public Safety Canada, and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. In that audit, you mentioned that there was also a process where racialized folks were interviewed, and in that interview they expressed that they perceived a lack of true commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion, and that expression, and that they expressed that meaningful change had not been achieved. This is something I hear often from constituents, particularly constituents who work in the public service, not just in these 6 organizations. And I believe that, although there's 6 organizations present here to which there's been testimony that there's not been meaningful change, I would also argue that in IRCC, the same exists there as well. And I know that the nature of this audit doesn't expand to IRCC particularly, but I do believe that it's likely important and likely persists there as well. In particular, I look at some of the offices that were under capacity. You mentioned capacity being one of the issues. And in one area there, it says on section 9.48 of the IRCC report, it suggests that there's a lack of capacity in sub-Saharan African offices. Do you perceive that, or has your work ever taken into account racism within IRCC, in particular to where capacity goes and where refugees or applications stem from? And do you think that that is likely a contributor to how some decisions are made or how some applications may even be delayed?
I'll try to address, I guess, both of the reports in my response. In the report that we looked at on inclusion in the workplace, while we did only go to 6 departments, it is absolutely just a sample of the public service. But I think it should serve as an alarm bell to everyone across the public service to really have leaders ask themselves if they are taking real concrete steps towards improving inclusion. Because what we found in that audit is most of those organizations focused on meeting employment equity targets, which is just step 1. It is not really ensuring that racialized employees feel valued, welcomed in the workplace. And so while it's just 6, I think the entire public service should care about our findings and should take action following them. To turn to Immigration and Refugee Canada and our audit on the processing of permanent resident applications, I tell you that the Deputy Minister has acknowledged that systemic discrimination exists in our organization. And in fact, a recent internal audit that was published on their website highlights that employees are raising discriminatory practices in the processing of applications. And what we found is that there really is differential outcomes, but that the organization was not analyzing their outcomes in that way. They weren't looking at the results based on race or country, and we did that for them in the audit, and we made recommendations towards them to better understand that. One of the big causes is where things are routed for processing, but knowing why and understanding the differential outcomes is the first place to start.
And thank you very much. That is the time for Mr. Desjardins. Ms. Kuzi, you have the floor for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for being here today. So it's been 24 years since it has been recognized that aging infrastructure is a critical issue, and yet this current government still has to present a strategy, a main plan for driving modernization. What would you say the primary reason for that is?
The primary reason for not having a strategy?
Correct.
I don't know, it's perplexing, as I said earlier.
It is.
It was identified in 1999 by the government as a problem, aging infrastructure. We did an audit in 2010 that reiterated that. It is decades of chronic underfunding that has brought the government to such a place. I think that there needs to be better leadership globally to see a change here. There needs to be better information around exactly how many systems need to be modernized, how many are not needed anymore, but more importantly, looking at the funding mechanisms which are poorly suited for major IT projects. So there's lots of good recommendations for the government to work on.
Thank you. A theme, Auditor General, throughout your reports is not collecting data and not using data that has been collected. Why would you say this government isn't doing a better job of collecting and using data in an effort to provide better services for Canadians and provide them at better value for Canadians?
I guess I could use the inclusion in the Inclusive Public Service Report as an example. There for decades have been commitments around improving employment equity, and there's been a flurry of activity and really good things that have resulted in the public service really being representative of the Canadian population. But for decades we haven't been gathering as a government the information along racial lines and splitting up visible minorities into different categories. There are different lived experiences and there are different reasons and barriers. And so I think that it's an issue we see in something about inclusion. We see it in IT. We see it in so many other programs. I think everyone's on that cusp of really understanding that data is key and essential, and it's part of our job to point out when it could be used better to drive more meaningful change.
Excellent, thank you. And my final question is, in 2021, Auditor General, the Secretariat estimated that it would cost $496 million to modernize all of the applications, and yet in November 2022, a third party, an external third party, increased this amount to between 2.7 and $3.4 billion. So would you say we're able to quantify the cost of inaction and further delays by this government?
I think what that points out is that there really is some missing skills and capacity in being able to identify the real costs of such a large initiative. The three systems that we're talking about here that treat old age security, Canada Pension Plan, and the Employment Insurance Program have existed for 20 to 60 years. They're old. There is so much complexity from a policy perspective. There's a lot that needs to be factored into what modernizing and improving these systems looks like. I took some positive in that the government has taken external advice now, and they're looking at this. But what's even more concerning is they don't have a full picture of how much it will cost. There's 7,500 applications across the public service that have been identified as needing to be modernized, and the costs are underestimated at this time. So it's about having the better skill set to be able to estimate it, but then also adjusting funding mechanisms to deal with the fact that major IT projects are lengthy, and how is the funding going to be adaptable to deal with the increasing costs that are inevitable as you take time to put something forward.
Thank you very much. Our last colleague is Ms. Khalid. You have the floor for approximately 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you, Auditor General and the whole team for this very extensive and good audit here. I just want to pick up, speaking of modernizing systems, our IT systems, do you think that there should be one, fulsome or wholesome system that covers all of our departments and agencies, or do you think that having these separate individual systems per department is a better approach?
I mean, this feels like a real foundational question on that. I could even give an analogy of, do you buy or lease a car? I think it really depends on the outcome, the objectives, the means, decentralized versus centralized, that is a big question. The federal government is huge. And there are so many systems that do very different things that I think it would almost be impossible to have one system that would provide all of the services across the country. Is there opportunity to consolidate and streamline? Absolutely, and I think that's part of having a good picture of what these 75 applications do, which are needed, which should be retired, and how do you modernize the public service going forward. And my advice is just don't lose sight of the outcome, that it's about improving service delivery to Canadians.
And other than funding or resources, are there other concerns with IT modernization, like security? I know we see security breaches or data being stolen in private companies as well as in some governments as well. What is your thought on that piece?
So it's concerning for me when I look at how many systems are seen as in poor health, right? Poor health could mean that they're either real old platforms, older technology, that maybe vendor support is limited, but also that there are security vulnerabilities as bad actors continue to be much more creative when it comes to cyber attacks. And that's why I was happy to see the prioritization of modernizing the three systems that feed such critical benefits to Canadians. But absolutely, that's why changing has to be taken seriously. It shouldn't be rushed. You do have to consider privacy of information, the security of information. And so there's a lot of factors. It's not as simple as buying something off the shelf and putting it into place. But it means that you need to have a good plan. And you also need to have prudent management of funds. You can't just keep spending, right? So they have to come hand in hand with knowing where you're going, but then managing the costs associated with it.
Thank you. And I have one last question. With respect to Report 9, the processing applications for permanent residents, have we looked at what the impact of the temporary resident files is on the processing times for permanent residents? Is that kind of a comparable measure that you've looked at?
The timeline that it takes to approve temporary foreign workers?
Temporary residents, visitor visas, work permits, business visas, etc.
I mean, there's a whole other set of programs and dedicated individuals looking at temporary resident applications. Those spike when school starts, and it's a whole other set of programs. There are many programs. In fact, for permanent residents, there are 50 in the department, and we looked at 8. So it's a complex web, and I think understanding the timelines there might be something better asked to the department, since we focused on permanent residents in this chapter.
Thank you. And I guess if I'll just ask one more,
Yep,
if that's fine. When we talk about modernizing the way that IRCC applications are processed, and I know that artificial intelligence has been a big part of it, of that conversation. Mm-hmm. What do you think would be some of the shortcomings of AI, and what would be the benefits as they kind of link to all of these reports with modernizing, but also being inclusive and sensitive to diversity within the workforce as well?
Well, I think we actually saw that the department tried to automate some of its application processing, sort of that initial triaging to ensure that an application maybe had key elements, and then routing it on. And what we saw there is that certain countries, for example, applications from Haiti, were more consistently routed for manual applications, which were taking longer. The department didn't analyze why that's happening. And so I think, to link it to your artificial intelligence question, I would say I have concerns when IT systems are put in place to speed up processes, and there is no sort of reflection afterwards about were there biases introduced in how it was designed. Does it access information or publicly available information that maybe contains misinformation? So those are all things to be concerned with as you automate or turn to artificial intelligence. And I will always be concerned about maintaining the privacy of anyone's personal information information. And this is an area where automating permanent resident applications needs to be looked at closely, since it is people's personal information that is being handled, and it should be well safeguarded.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you all very, very much. The bells are ringing. I'm just going to ask members just to hold on for a minute or two. Ms. Hogan, thank you, and to your entire team at the Office of the Auditor General, thank you for being here today. I know you have a busy day. You're certainly excused right now. We're just going to do some little housekeeping, but please don't let us hold you back any longer. And thank you again. And we will see you, of course, back here for the study of these reports. Colleagues, just to remind you, on Tuesday next week, we have a study into rehabilitation of Parliament Centre Block on Tuesday. And on Thursday, I want to propose a subcommittee meeting for the first hour so we can begin to map out our next moves and plan out the calendar for the clerk to go on that. And that will follow with the line by line on the emergency management in First Nation communities, I believe. So please look for that. As well, because we have votes, I'm going with your approval. I'm just going to adjourn this meeting. I won't call you back just before noon because we don't have any time after noon. Is that acceptable? All right, this meeting is adjourned. We'll see you back here Tuesday.